The 1970s was a period that is generally considered to be the era when superbikes were born. When people think of these bikes, most often the very first bike that comes to mind is the Kawasaki 900. At that time, as far as street bikes go, there was no doubt that the Z900 had a huge amount of horsepower. But was it actually as good as everybody says? Or has it just been exaggerated over the years? So many internet sites and YouTube channels are putting out the incorrect information, it is literally beyond a joke. I spent a huge amount of time researching for this video, downloading factory manuals, not sales brochures, dyno tests, and reading period road tests to get the 100% correct information. So I do hope at least some of you appreciate it. For this video, to be 100% fair, let's take a look at the big bikes that were on offer right smack in the middle of the 1970s. That being 1974 and 1975. And for a yardstick, I'll put up the specs for the bike which many consider to be the very first superbike, the Honda CB750. All quarter mile times and top speeds are taken from actual period road tests, not factory claims. And the first cab off the rank is the Suzuki GT750. Its 738cc inline 3-cylinder liquid-cooled 2-stroke engine produced 67 horsepower for the 1974 model. And after a few engine tweaks, another 3 horsepower for the 1975 model. However, the exhaust was also modified with increased baffling, and actual performance figures remained pretty much unchanged. Its top speed was 115 miles per hour. Suzuki claimed better, of course, as many did back in the day, but not all. At the time, Suzuki sales brochures claimed a quarter mile time of 12.6 seconds. However, in reality, its best quarter mile time was 13.2 seconds. At the very best. The Suzuki's handling was adequate, considering it was a bit of a heifer, and the bike did lack cornering ground clearance. However, it had quite good brakes. The bike featured a gear position indicator. While many at the time deemed it as an unnecessary item, because in reality you're either in the right gear or you're not, it was still something nobody else had. The Kawasaki H2 had a similar inline 3-cylinder 2-stroke engine, but it was air-cooled. The very first model H2 produced 74 horsepower. But by the mid-70s, the bike had been detuned somewhat, and its engine power was now 3 horsepower less, at 71 horsepower. But the H2 was still a bit of a beast to ride, especially compared to the GT750, which was a bit more sedate. Its engine too sounded vastly different. It was aimed at a different type of rider. While the original model H2 did indeed cover the quarter mile in 12 seconds flat, by the mid-70s the best quarter mile time that could be achieved on an H2 was 12.7 seconds, 3/4 of a second slower. The H2s had a bad reputation when it comes to handling, but this was undeserved. So undeserved in fact, I produced a separate video on the channel about this very subject alone. From 1974, the H2 featured a longer wheelbase, and on these 2 later models, handling was significantly improved. Its top speed, if you were game enough that is, was faster than that of the GT750 at 121 miles per hour. Yamaha's big bike at the time was the TX750. The first version of this bike had some very serious engine issues, which caused many engines to fail. But for 1974, a much improved second version was released, the TX750A. While Yamaha had addressed all of the problems associated with the first model, the bike's reputation was damaged so severely that it just did not sell well, which was a bit of a shame because the now fixed 743cc single overhead camshaft balanced parallel twin was something quite new in the 1970s. It produced 63 horsepower, which was quite powerful for a parallel twin at that time. However, its quarter mile time of just 13.8 seconds and its top speed of just 112 miles per hour meant the big Yamaha, as far as performance goes, was just not in the same league as the previous bikes. Honda, of course, had the CB750, which was still very competitive with most of the bikes of this era, but by the mid-1970s it was getting a bit long in the tooth and outdated. So in 1975, Honda released a bike which was quite different to anything else that any other brand had on offer. This was the GL1000 Goldwing. It featured a 999cc liquid-cooled 4-cylinder boxer engine. It was ridiculed at the time for being far too heavy, 584 pounds in fact. But its engine produced exactly 79 horsepower. It would cover the quarter mile in 13.1 seconds, and its top speed was actually recorded on one occasion at 129 miles per hour. But 125 miles per hour was much more common. The bike, although pretty large, was certainly no slouch. What looked like its fuel tank was actually a storage area, and the actual fuel tank itself was under the seat. This, along with the low centre of gravity of the boxer engine, meant that although the bike was quite heavy, it was still a pretty nimble motorcycle. It also had a shaft final drive. Moto Guzzi had the strikingly beautiful shaft drive 750S, which then became the 750S3 in 1975. They were basically the same bike, but the later S3 had a rear disc brake fitted, along with Moto Guzzi's new integral braking system. With this brake system, the rear brake pedal operated not only the rear disc, but also one of the two front discs, and applying the front brake lever would operate the second front disc. Back then, this new system did cop some criticism. However, it actually worked pretty well, causing the bike to squat under hard braking rather than just nosedive. Anyone that's ever owned an older Guzzi would know that I speak the truth. The 748cc V-twin engine, which looked amazing, was quite powerful, with the factory claiming 70 CV, which equates to exactly 69 horsepower. However, the bikes were very tall geared, and along with the somewhat hit and miss dry clutch and its heavy flywheel, consistently quick quarter mile times were very difficult to achieve. To be honest, the acceleration of these bikes was pretty slow, with a quarter mile time of just 13.7 seconds. Moto Guzzi claimed a top speed of 128 miles per hour. At the time, many believed this figure was vastly over-exaggerated, but it wasn't. You see, these Guzzis had a very high ratio gearbox. It would actually do 120 miles per hour in fourth gear. And I found two separate road tests where the bike eventually reached a top speed of 136 miles per hour. It just took a while to get there. And the average top speed of all the runs was 127 miles per hour. So Moto Guzzi's claim at the time was indeed very well justified, making it the fastest bike on this list so far. More on this later. In the mid-1970s, Ducati had their 750 and 900cc Super Sport models, but these models were mainly produced for production racing, and they were produced in very limited numbers, as well as being unbelievably expensive. So for the sake of this video, I will focus on the 750 Sport, which is a model that was more available to the general public. This model is considered to be one of the most significant bikes Ducati ever produced. Its bodywork was made of fiberglass and painted with bright yellow paint, meaning it certainly stood out. However, it was a bare bones motorcycle with a head down, arse up riding position and just a solo seat. It was pure sports with no air filters, no electric start, and it didn't even have a side stand. Matter of fact, I knew a bloke that had one, and one day he wheeled it out of his garage to start it and the bike kicked back on him. It broke his leg, quite severely in fact. Later on he sold the bike because he was just too scared of it. But still, The Ducati did offer the highest standard in performance and handling. You see, the Italians understood that a great motorcycle wasn't just about outright horsepower, it's about balance. And it also offered incredible lean angles due to its very narrow design. Even though its L-twin engine only produced 62 horsepower, the bike was extremely light, at just 408 pounds, the lightest bike on this list, and 80 kilos lighter than the Goldwing. This gave the bike an impressive quarter-mile time of 12.6 seconds. The bike also had an outstanding and verified top speed of 131 miles per hour. The engine was extremely torquey, and along with the light weight, this bike in fact had the best top gear roll-ons from 50 to 90 miles per hour of any bike on this list, even better than the Kawasaki 900. BMW's big bike at that time was the R90S. It had an 898cc air-cooled twin-cylinder boxer engine which produced 67 horsepower. It featured a bikini fairing as standard, with a very nice instrument cluster and a handy storage space under the seat. But it was the paint scheme of this bike that set it apart, and it was available in 2 different colour schemes, which was airbrushed. The bikes looked amazing. While it was no rocket ship, immediately off the line that is, its mid-range stood out, and it could match it with pretty much any bike on this list in the real world. It would cover the quarter mile in 13.2 seconds. Its top speed was 125 miles per hour, and it would do it easy. But similar to the Moto Guzzi and the Ducati, it was a very expensive motorcycle. How much better do you think the Z900 compares so far? Stay tuned to find out. Next is the MV Agusta 750S, regarded as one of the finest motorcycles of all time. It was produced in very limited numbers, and it was also unbelievably expensive, and by far the most expensive bike on this list. You could actually buy 3 Honda 750s for the price of one of these. If you look around, horsepower figures for this bike are all over the place, but as I have a factory brochure, I can say without any doubt whatsoever, its inline 743c 4-cylinder gear-driven double overhead camshaft engine produced 75 horsepower, which was a lot of power, especially for a 750 in the mid-1970s. For such an expensive bike, producing that amount of power at the crank, you would expect it to have unbelievable performance. But these bikes were insanely overgeared, which meant its initial acceleration was nothing fantastic. Its absolute best quarter mile time was 13.2 seconds. Not really that impressive. You see, the bike was designed and geared for mid-range and top-end performance, and in this regard it did excel. In 4th gear, they would top out at 117 miles per hour. Then after changing into top gear, revs would significantly drop, and progress would be slow. The factory claimed a top speed of 129 miles per hour. And indeed, it went at least that fast, as long as you had enough road to get there. But for some very odd reason, MV decided to fit a shaft drive to this bike, and you couldn't change the gearing. Hence, it wasn't that quick over the quarter mile. The big British bikes at the time were the Triumph 750 Triple and the Norton 850 Commando. The Norton 850 Commando produced just 60 horsepower. Surprisingly though, and I can't actually explain it, but these vertical twin Norton 850s were pretty quick bikes over the quarter mile, and it would cover the distance in 12.8 seconds. Very impressive. I can only assume its gearbox ratios managed the engine power perfectly. However, its top speed was still pretty ordinary at just 116 miles per hour. While the Triumph 750 Triple produced just 58 horsepower, the lowest of any bike on this list. The 1975 Trident, the T160's quarter mile time was a measly 13.9 seconds, and its top speed was only 115 miles per hour. However, the 1974 T150 Trident had a far less restrictive exhaust system, and it was a full second quicker over the quarter mile, 12.9 seconds in fact. Surprisingly quick. And its top speed was 119 miles per hour. It was significantly quicker and slightly faster than the 75 model, and a very good bike. If you're wondering how a bike which produces just 58 horsepower can be just as quick as bikes with much more horsepower, I will explain it at the very end of the video. The Harley-Davidson Sportster produced more power than both the British bikes.
You cannot be serious!
61 horsepower. Yes, 61, not 57 like all the motorcycle spec internet sites claim. Anyway, the Sportster's nicely spaced 4-speed gearbox made very good use of the bike's huge amount of low-down torque. And this may surprise many of you, but in standard form a Sportster would cover the quarter mile in 13.4 seconds. But just by modifying or removing its very restrictive mufflers, which just slipped on, and let's face it, it was a simple no-cost modification, anyone could do it and everyone did, its quarter mile time was immediately improved to under 13 seconds, 12.8 seconds. Surprised? I bet you are. I know I was. You can bag Harleys as much as you want to, but these are the facts. And with a top speed of at least 115 miles per hour, in the mid-1970s, this Harley could still match it with many bikes in this list. Although its handling, and especially its braking, were probably the worst of all these bikes. Then there is the Laverda 3C, which was manufactured in very small numbers in a small factory in northern Italy. It was a brutal bike to ride with heavy controls and stiff suspension. But its 981cc double overhead camshaft inline 3-cylinder engine produced a whopping 80 horsepower. It was fast too, with a verified top speed of 136 miles per hour. However, it wasn't an easy bike to master. It weighed 545 pounds. And even with 80 horsepower on tap, its absolute best quarter mile time was 12.9 seconds. Very similar to many of the other bikes. Another Italian bike produced in very few numbers was the Benelli 756. It actually produced 71 horsepower, not 76, as is very commonly reported. Still, it was a pretty impressive figure for a 750. It also covered the quarter mile in 12.9 seconds. And its top speed was an impressive 127 miles per hour. It was by far the smoothest bike to ride on this whole list. 6-cylinder engines are inherently smooth. And as far as looks go, with those 6 upswept mufflers, it certainly looked like a superbike. But while it was true it was the very first 6-cylinder motorcycle to actually go into production, it was not the first 6-cylinder motorcycle. So how does the so-called king, the Kawasaki 900, with its 903cc inline double overhead camshaft 4-cylinder engine rate when compared to all of these other superbikes? Firstly, let's look at horsepower. Where does it rate on the list? Right at number 1, with 82 horsepower. No real surprise. What about acceleration? I've covered this bike before on the channel and listed its best quarter mile time as 12.4 seconds. But since then, I've uncovered another period road test which timed the bike at 12.2 seconds, making it easily the quickest bike on this list. Lastly, what about top speed? Well, the fastest proven top speed I've managed to find is 132 miles per hour. 4 miles per hour less than the Moto Guzzi and the Laverda. However, it reaches top speed a hell of a lot quicker than both of those bikes, and the big quacker would be so far in front by the time the Italians reach their top speed, they would literally need miles to catch up to it. While all the Italian bikes may have handled better than the Z900, when it came to outright performance, the Kawasaki 900 was indeed the king. Absolutely no doubt about it. And the results from the Castrol 6-hour production bike race, held annually in Australia at the time, confirm this. The Kawasaki 900 finished first in 1973, first, second and third in 1974, first and third in 1975, first in 1976 and second in 1977. In real world riding, and I'm sorry if this bursts anyone's bubble, but none of these bikes could get anywhere near a Kawasaki 900. Not even one of them. The figures speak for themselves. Now, getting back to why some bikes with less power are quicker than more powerful machines. It's all about gear ratios, power to weight ratios, drivetrain efficiency, and rear wheel horsepower. Let's look at the bikes in order of claimed horsepower at the crank compared to actual horsepower at the rear wheel and see how much the list changes. If you look at the Triumph T150, you'll notice Triumph claimed 58 horsepower at the crank, while Honda claimed 67 horsepower for the CB750. Yet the Triumph only loses 5 horsepower to the rear wheel compared to the Honda's drop of 17 horsepower. Whether this is because the Triumph had a much more efficient driveline or Honda overstated the CB750's horsepower at the crank, I do not know. It's pretty interesting stuff though, don't you think? So that's about it. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel and check out the other videos on the channel. Cheers.